I know. Why make a video on this? The answer should be obvious to anyone. We've had horror genre for centuries now in different media after all. The books, the movies, the plays, the macabre attractions, even the music. How are games any different? Well, here's the thing. If I show you examples of movies that are considered horror, you will probably not have much issue with it. Yes, this is more of a comedy and this is more of a sci-fi, but it's all horror, right? Well, here are some horror games. Are they? Is this a horror game? I'm saying that it is, but am I just wrong? Why does it feel weird? Is it because I'm grouping them together? I'll try to answer these questions, and to do that, let's quickly go over the basics. If we go to the Oxford Dictionary online and look up horror, here's what we see. Horror, mass noun, an intense feeling of fear, shock, or disgust. And in fact, it also specifies that it means a literary or film genre concerned with arousing feelings of horror, which can be used as a modifier like in horror film. And since we're looking at definitions, let's also establish that in literature, there are two tools of achieving the goal of scaring the reader: horror and terror. Terror is the build-up, the anxiety, the fear. Horror is the realization of this build-up, the shock, the scary reveal. There's a really good explanation of what difference between the two tools is in The Gothic Flame by Devendra Varma. The difference between terror and horror is the difference between awful apprehension and sickening realization, between the smell of death and stumbling against a corpse. It's worth noting that there's also a third tool that Stephen King adds in his classification. He calls it gross out, and it's essentially the part of the reveal that evokes feelings of disgust. So, knowing this, it's easier to understand how horror has worked ever since it has been established as a distinct genre in literature during Gothic fiction period of late 18th century, and evolved with different formats of media to this day, be it in interactive webcomics designed to scare you or the creepypasta as a more defined take on the urban legends. Originally, I wanted to go through the history of horror in general, and in preparation read lots of amazing works on the subject covering different aspects of horror in literature and movies, as the two most studied formats of horror can be found in. But that's simply too long and ultimately doesn't answer the question that I pose in the title. What I can say is that if you are interested in the subject, I can recommend checking the aforementioned The Gothic Flame, Lovecraft's essay Supernatural Horror in Literature, and even Stephen King's Danse Macabre, even though Mr. King does delve a bit too deep into reviewing every movie he talks about and his preferences about it, instead of trying to take a more academic approach to the project. What is relevant to the topic is that there are common threads throughout all the works that I've read, all the different opinions I've heard that explain human love for horror. What it usually boils down to, ever since the scary myths and folktales of ancient times, is a mixture of morality tale, ability to bring up the topics that might be considered taboo, by using the horror scenario as a metaphor for real event, and the simple fact that people do like to feel scared when it's done in a controlled manner. Let's go back to that list of games that felt so wrong yet so right. Why does it feel so weird to see all those games grouped together as if they're similar? The thing is, unlike movies, books, or many other forms of media, games are interactive in their consumption. Those interactions can be extremely limited, or the game can be a completely open sandbox, but it's the fact that you interact is what matters in a video game. The actions we perform in the game, or the gameplay, define the genre we assign to it, and it feels right when we group games by the genre. But horror isn't an action. This is an action platform game. It's horror. This is an FPS. That is also horror. This is a point-and-click adventure. It's horror. This is a racing game. It has a very distinct horror flavor to it, though. Here's a first-person stealth adventure that is horror. You get the picture. Horror in video games is a theme, a storyline genre. It can be a design philosophy, that is, to attempt to scare the player, but not a game genre. Or is it? I have seen adventure and narrative exploration titles to be just called horror, as if it's a genre. just as I've seen many stealth action titles or RPGs called immersive sim as a genre, because definitions evolve and change, things take time to establish, and the dictionary adapts. It would be great if we'd find something that fits such a broad group of established genres, a better descriptive genre title than just horror. Doom clones stopped being called that and became first-person shooters after all. Then again, we still have Metroidvania as a genre title, so who knows. So, what is a horror game? Is it just a game that's designed to scare you? What happens if it fails doing that, but still remains a fantastic stealth adventure or a shoot-'em-up? Does it make it a failure? Could you still recommend it to others? And if so, would you still call it a horror game? Or maybe a horror game is specifically an adventure horror title where the sole goal is to scare the player. So it's easier to group games like this together as a genre and recommend to other people. I mean, that's one of the main benefits of having defined genres, is to be able to find more of what you already like. And right now, with how confusing this list of horror games is, if I like, say, the first Condemned game, it doesn't necessarily mean that I will enjoy Doki Doki Literature Club. Personally, I simply don't use horror as a genre title in video games at all, instead using it only as a modifier, or saying that the game is horror themed, because I fear that otherwise a horror game is currently such a broad term that it will only confuse people by using it without elaborating on how the game actually plays. And my personal answer to the question is, a horror game is a theme, not a genre. But as I said, things can and will change, and it's up to us to stop it's up to us, people using these game terminologies in everyday life, to build over time the definitive answer to what is a horror game.